I'm Stephen Spaulding, generally go by Steve. I live in Hollis, New Hampshire, which is where we are now. We're actually in my home in Hollis, and I first became aware of the proposed pipeline actually indirectly through my next door neighbor who was home at a time that I was not, and a representative from Kinder Morgan came to her house, and I never got a completely clear account of the nature of that conversation, but in any case, she alerted my wife and me to the fact that somebody from Kinder Morgan had come by interested in getting permission to survey our property. The pipeline route that was being contemplated at that time, as nearly as we could determine, would have come within about 25 feet of my garage, running right down the length of my driveway. I don't believe that the neighbor who had the conversation with the Kinder Morgan representative, I believe that her property, she would have been an abutter. I don't think the pipeline would have directly impacted her property, which might have been disadvantageous for her because she probably would have been eligible for less compensation than I might have been in the event of an easement being granted one way or another. In any case, that was the first I heard about it. That was very early April, during the first week of April of this year. And a number of my other neighbors got similar inquiries. I actually, very shortly after getting a verbal account from my neighbor about this visit from the representative, Audrey, my wife, and I did receive a letter from Kinder Morgan saying, in a fairly roundabout, innocuous as possible way, we're interested in surveying your property. This will give you an opportunity to point out particular features of the property that you would like us to be aware of. At no point did it come out and say directly, we want to run a pipeline through your property, and in order to do that, we need to survey it, and that's what we're interested in. They really tried to couch it in sort of cooperative, beneficial terms. And this letter made me angry. The whole notion made me angry to begin with, but just the tone of the letter, I just felt like grabbing somebody and saying, hey, say what you mean here. You want to take my land. In any case, I resolved to ignore the letter. I never did respond to it, which I think my impression is that it positioned me in the majority of homeowners who had received similar letters. I could be wrong about this, but my sense is that most of us just ignored them. I do know of a few people who initially gave permission to survey and subsequently rescinded that permission. There was some discussion about the strategy, what was the most effective way to deal with a situation like this if you were a landowner in the line of fire. And I'm not sure that there's any real consensus on that, but my feeling, as much emotional as practical, was I don't want to deal with these people. I am not going to respond to them. And I basically determined that however things unfolded, that would be my position. And my position would be, up until the last moment, you're not coming on my property unless you have a police escort. I don't care that you've got authorization to enter my land for survey purposes. In order for you to get on the land, you need to bring the police here to escort me off it. Of course, it never came to that, and does not seem likely to come to that because the route has changed. I want to give David a chance to talk in just a second. I will say that as a neighborhood, my neighbors and I quickly formed a loose organization, or we kind of got together and talked and began to try to figure out how we should respond. One of my neighbors got in touch with the Community Environmental Legal Foundation.
Conservation?
No, not the
Conservation
conservation.
law?
No,
Community
no,
Environmental
Environmental
Legal Defense Fund.
Defense Fund. Right, I was leaving one out. This is an organization that is quite vigorous about fighting this sort of campaign. In any case, a representative from that organization came to our street, came to a neighbor's house. This was probably late April by this time, and she talked to us about possible ways to proceed. And in the course of that, she mentioned that David Moloney had been in touch with her. I don't think they'd actually spoken at that time, but David had called her office and she had responded. She had called back and they were trading messages. But I knew David, not well, but he and I used to work at the same company, a fairly large company. We never worked directly together, but I knew who he was. And I said, well, if he's been in touch with these people and we're in touch with these people, I'll call him and just say that this person is interested in completing the connection. And so I called David, and he soon thereafter joined forces with us. And I'll turn it over to him.
Okay,
to
so my name is Dave Moloney. I live in Hollis, about 2 miles from Steve. And I got involved because, well, for a lot of reasons. I had been alerted that there was a Kinder Morgan pipeline meeting at the high school, Hollis High School, and it was going around on Facebook, and I had no idea what it meant or why they'd be in any way remotely interested in Hollis. So I went to that meeting, and I don't know, I think there's an activist inside me deep down, and this brought out all of it in me. And at that meeting, I think my blood was boiling. And I spoke up and I talked about a few things regarding the pipeline. I asked a few questions of Kinder Morgan. And I also turned to the audience in the middle of that and said, I am interested in forming a coalition to fight this pipeline. If there are people at this meeting that are interested in doing that, then please come by and talk to me afterwards, and let's get a list of names going and see what we can do. So I did get a list of names, not a long list. It's a little surprising because about 95% of the people that were there were vehemently opposed to the pipeline, and yet I only got a handful of names, yet I did get a few. I got a phone call after that from a woman who was interested in getting involved, and she and another woman decided all three of us would meet. We had one meeting, and at that meeting I learned that Fletcher Lane was having a get-together with Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and that I'm invited to attend that if interested, and I was. So I came and met these amazing people on Fletcher Lane who I think the most interesting thing about it is I think everybody who gets involved in an issue like this is immediately NIMBY about it, because it is in your backyard and you do have a very visceral and natural response to a situation where you feel like your property is being violated, your home is being violated. And in my case, it was my neighborhood and my community was being violated. I live about 2 miles from where this pipeline's being proposed, now about 2.5 miles from it. So it's remote to me in some ways, and yet I do want to protect this community. I do want to protect Hollis, and I feel for the people of Fletcher Lane and any place where this pipeline would go through. I do feel for those people, and I don't think it's fair that someone should be asked to subsidize a pipeline company who is going to basically take land by any means they consider necessary. And if that means eminent domain, they will. That in itself is just adamantly wrong. There's something wrong with our system if it allows that to happen, especially the way in which it tends to allow it to happen. I could go into that, but
I would like to say on that point, I would like to give a real tip of the hat to David for his incredibly energetic, dedicated approach to this problem, even though it would have been pretty easy for him, notwithstanding whatever general feelings he might have had, to say, well, this is unfortunate, but it's not coming at me. It's not coming through my yard. He has been a pillar of support to those of us who were in the line of fire, and to everybody, really everybody in 2 or 3 states in waging this battle. So he deserves a lot of credit for being as community-minded and as energetic and effective as he has been.
thank you, as has Steve, by the way, who is a fantastic writer. So if he's given me a few accolades, I'm giving a few back. He's written some amazing letters, and he has the ability to write quite succinctly and from the heart, as well as be very on topic and forthright. So I commend all his efforts as well. He's written some amazing letters to Maggie Hassan, to all kinds of senators, to the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to a number of others, and along with editing a lot of information on our website, by the way. So what has happened since then is we've developed a website. That happened very early on, where we developed nhpipelineawareness.org. And Steve is our editor, I would say, and has done a fantastic job. And so together, we each have different strengths. I think that my strengths lie generally in the sort of analysis area, where I can just kind of see the big picture in a lot of ways behind what's going on, and I'm not afraid of numbers. I use a lot of numbers in the daytime, and my daytime job, so I don't get scared when I see, billions of cubic feet per day and that sort of thing. Those things don't alarm me. So I am able to process that information, and then sometimes find some things that may or may not help to sort of factualize the effort to bring some of these issues forward as we see them and as we find them. And so we've done some amazing things. I think, that whole big picture mentality, I see this, like I said, I was unprepared for what was going to happen. I kind of got this NIMBY response, just like everybody else in our neighborhood did at the beginning. And then from there, what I've seen is that despite the fact that the pipeline is not coming through Fletcher Lane, the people who have turned themselves on to this issue and have determined what exactly this means and all of the repercussions and ramifications of it, they don't care whether it's coming through their community anymore. No one cares if it's coming through their individual community, because what they understand is that we are all community and we are all affected, and that if we're going to come up with right-sized decisions for our energy future, it's going to have to involve saying no to a lot more of these types of things, a lot more no's to pipelines and other things. The pipeline, the gas pipeline in itself is one issue, and yet if we really take a step back and we look at this from a larger perspective, we've got XL pipeline coming down the pike with a new election, and we see the same issues in the XL pipeline as we see in this gas pipeline. The same attempt by a small set of companies to dominate the scenario, to buy off government and to make things happen in their favor. And everything, all the levers and knobs and are set up, designed to work in their favor at every step of this process. So if we even look at the XL pipeline, it's, we're talking destruction of pristine lands in Canada. Well, we have pristine lands here in Hollis, New Hampshire. We're talking about, a highly inefficient oil source that's 17% more burns less cleanly than the conventional oil we get from the Gulf. Well, now here we're talking about Marcellus shale. And what does that all mean? Well, it comes with all kinds of things that people don't really talk about, like such as radon, for instance. There's all kinds of radon in the Marcellus shale and in Utica shale, and that radon does travel through pipelines, and it's going to end up in people's homes, and it's going to affect people, behind, who are being serviced by natural gas. So, that's just one minor, tiny little thing, but you can see where the parallels are between things like XL and things like this. They talk about XL being 3,000 jobs, but all of them are temporary. Well, the Kinder Morgan pipeline is supposed to produce 3,000 jobs, and they're all temporary. The XL pipeline is going to produce 35 permanent jobs all the way from Canada down to the Gulf. 35 permanent jobs. You can't even service a McDonald's restaurant with 35 people. So the same is true of this pipeline coming through now potentially through Hollis, but into our region of New Hampshire. So there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot that's just wrong about it all the way from the start to the end.
Well, for sure, and I kind of want to take a step back in my personal narrative here. One thing I will say is that I have never lived in a home where natural gas was available. I think that's a true statement. I've never been a natural gas customer. So I never gave natural gas per se a whole lot of thought. But I've always considered myself an environmentalist, not necessarily a terribly well-informed one, but a committed one. And my feeling for as long as I can remember has always been, there's a very simple logical fact here. We have this planet that is not indestructible. It's not inexhaustible. So in my mind, there is nothing more important than protecting the environment in all sorts of areas, including natural gas and more broadly fossil fuel usage. I would say before I became aware of the term and the practice fracking, I was aware of climate change and the serious threat to the environment that comes primarily from the burning of fossil fuels. And going back to what I said a moment ago, this planet is not inexhaustible. There's only a certain amount of fossil fuel reserves available. And if your policy is going to be, we're going to get it all, and from the perspective of the exploiters of that energy, I would say that the approach is not only are we going to get it all, we're going to get it as fast as we can, and then we're going to dig deeper and dig in more places, drill, baby, drill, and keep going after it. Well, what is the end point here? It's not hard to figure out. Even if it weren't threatening to melt the planet to do that, you're going to run out of it. You can't do that forever. And in fact, we are closer than I think a lot of people realize to the end of forever in terms of our ability to extract fossil fuels. Add to that the very significant fact that burning these fuels is threatening us with, if not extermination, at least disaster after disaster after disaster, a good many of which we've seen, in my judgment, in recent years. And my feeling has always been, what is wrong with us? Surely it is obvious that this can't go on. With respect to natural gas specifically, before I was threatened with having this pipe coming through my yard, the aspect of that industry that alarmed me greatly was fracking, because I was aware that I can't give a very sophisticated explanation of how fracking works, but from the get-go I understood that it works by pumping a whole lot of toxins at high pressure into the earth, and that there were a lot of unpleasant side effects from this. And even though I have to admit I don't believe I've ever seen a fracking well, I've seen pictures of them and read enough accounts to know that if I lived there, if I lived within 2 miles of a fracking operation, particularly if my home were dear to me, if the landscape around me were dear to me, I would be tremendously upset by having this go on. This is compounded by, I guess you could call them political concerns, the fact that the fracking industry has been sheltered from regulation and investigation. The sweetheart deal that it came in the form of the Halliburton loophole outraged me long before this pipeline came along. So I certainly had a very strong NIMBY response when they told me they wanted to put this in my backyard. But I felt righteous from the beginning, in the sense that this was a further expansion of an energy policy and a pattern of treatment of our environment that I consider outrageous, unsustainable, and intolerable.
Yeah. I mean, actually, that's an interesting, if we talk just in terms of water resource, it's a 3 to 1, so it takes 3 barrels of water to produce 1 barrel of oil, bitumen oil from the tar sands in Canada. And if we look at that from the fracking, you see another parallel there. We see that massive amounts of water have to be infused into the earth and then used to frack rock, and that once that rock is fracked, then you've got a receiving well to get all this gas, but then there's this fugitive gas that escapes through the soil and penetrates up through the environment and becomes, ozone. In fact, there's a recent report that said something about ozone being more prominent in rural areas than in city areas, which is a really interesting fact that has been produced, and that there isn't enough testing in rural areas about ozone, because we just didn't think that it was a problem in rural areas. Well, guess what? Now that we're fracking and now that we're producing all this bitumen in rural areas, well, now it's a problem. And these parallels are just amazing, that they just continue right down the line, and we don't do very much about them. That we've got an industry that could care less, really, in so many ways. And I think I guess the part that I don't know, if I think about the industry itself, the Halliburton rule, we've got basically makes it okay to send any kind of chemical you want down into the earth, including the only fuel, the only chemical that's actually regulated for fracking is diesel fuel. And guess what? They send diesel fuel down too. I mean, it's been proven that they use diesel fuel in these wells. But why? Because they can get away with it, because they're not regulated, because there is no one to regulate. In fact, the regulation industry is being downsized right now just at the time when fracking is becoming, and there's more fracking and there's more tar sands oil being extracted at that same time, making way once again for industry to do carte blanche whatever they want, and for us to reap the damage. It's become a real. It's amazing how things have just how things remain in the hands of large companies who are very concerned right now. I mean, we've got a real issue with the fact that all of these energy systems have at their core a small set of very large companies who have very vested interests in keeping a very centralized control over how energy is distributed in the United States and in the world. And that central control that they maintain is very scared of things like distributed solar, wind farms, these things that potentially put fuel sources and the activity and the work effort to produce energy back into local communities. That scares them to pieces. And it's the last thing they want, is for that to happen. And yet it is the only way that we can provide a sustainable future for all of us and provide communities with sustainable jobs and sustainable energy.
I would just want to throw in here, that's a common theme that people are talking about, sustainable versus,
Sure.
Fossil fuels that are going to go extinct, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Are there any just last words that you want to share before, in your interview here?
Well, I wanted to follow on what David said. The industry may or may not be evil, but they're not stupid, and they can see the handwriting on the wall. Even if there were no resistance to what they do, they're aware that they can't do it forever. And I'm convinced that a large part of why we're seeing a number of proposed enormous projects like Keystone XL, this is certainly on a far smaller scale than Keystone XL, but the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline project is non-trivial. It's a major project, and it is sized far above what they would have us believe we need in order to address the recent crisis, so to speak. There's no doubt in my mind the industry is trying to lock themselves in. They are overbuilding to the full extent possible. They want to build everything they can, everywhere they can, at which point they assume that the populace will say, well, we've got the pipes, we've got the gas, we've got the dirty oil coming through. Not that any of that is intended for use in this country, but there's really nothing to do but use it. And I think they're prolonging, they're postponing the inevitable death of the industry. And unfortunately, that postponement comes at a very high cost to all of us.
Yeah, I just heard something original from the Heritage Foundation. It was an interesting set of logic where they said that the XL pipeline was going to be that we should build the XL pipeline because it's environmentally friendly. And why is that? Because then we won't be shipping things over rail, which is far more hazard prone. There's a bizarre logic in all of that, and the bottom line is that we do need to keep that carbon source in the ground. That's the point, that we cannot take that out. And we have the same problem with gas and fracking. We need to keep that also in the soil and not take it out because we cannot reach our goals. We all know that the renewable portfolio standards and the greenhouse gas emissions that are required to keep this under 2 degrees is something that requires us to get to 80% less emissions than we currently have from 1990 levels. We are so far off that mark, it's scary, and we're rolling the dice for our future, and this is just not sustainable development. and the industry needs to wise up and learn that themselves.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think we're getting the word out. Thank
Great.
you.
Well, thanks
Thank
for
you.
your help.